it feels better for us humans to place our life in a narrative structure, because otherwise it just feels like the chaos that it actually is.
Welcome to Back to the Future podcast. My name is Victor Sadia, and I talk with brilliant minds and hearts of people who want to uproot and transform the current health and wellness paradigm. Deborah Copaken is the New York Times bestselling author of Shutter Babe, The Red Book, and Between Here and April, among others. She's also been a war photographer, TV producer, screenwriter, and performer. Her most recent book is Lady Parts, and she publishes a newsletter by the same name. In this episode, the discussion revolves around the human need to play with narrative structures to provide a sense of order in the face of life's inherent chaos. Deborah shares personal insights into life, death, and the challenges of navigating the health insurance industry. She emphasizes the importance of honesty and truthfulness about one's experiences, advocating for a shift away from defining ourselves by external achievements and titles. She reflects on the transformative power of writing as a tool for processing trauma and emphasizes the universality of individual stories. We talk about the shock of waking up in a recovery room after surgery, the rituals of remembrance, the impact of menopause hormone treatment, and the asymmetries of our health system, as well as the role of humor in our everyday lives. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Today we have Deborah Copaken. Deborah, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. So, in your book, Lady Parts, which I loved, you are a few minutes before entering surgery, and this word in Hebrew comes back to mind, which is hineni, here I am, which is, I'm Jewish, although like you, I don't practice a lot, but I do have that word really engraved into my psyche in a sense. What does it mean for you to be and to say, here I am, with that intention?
So let's go back to the origin of that in my life, which is, I went to Hebrew school from the age of 5 years onward. And that's one of the first things I remember learning, that Abraham says, Hineni, here I am. I don't believe in God. I do like the Jewish tradition, so I don't negate my religion, but I have learned a lot from it. And I often think of that, and maybe because I learned it so early, in a moment of survival. So, for example, when I was in the Soviet coup and on the third night, there were a lot of people throwing Molotov cocktails and the tanks were firing back on them. It was just kind of a disaster moment to be caught in the middle of it. And I was lying on the ground in a puddle and I kept thinking, Hineni, Hineni, here I am. And it's almost a shout into the void, right? I exist. I'm alive. Be present. Experience this. Understand that you are going through something right now and hopefully you'll get out the other end.
And what does it mean for you to go into surgery? Because surgery has been a big thing, a big theme in your life. And what does it mean for you to go into that space and coming back from the other side by also affirming that moment when you are basically putting your life into the hands of others?
Oh, it's so interesting because I recently had surgery on my ears. I lost my hearing to COVID. And I'm so used to surgery at this point that it's no big deal. But I am often struck by the ways in which it feels like a small death, right? You're put under, you're alive, and suddenly you're not alive, or you don't feel alive. And then you come back from the dead and you wake up in a recovery room. And it's always kind of shocking to wake up in that recovery room, much more shocking than waking up from sleep, because you go to sleep at night, you drift off to sleep, you wake up perhaps slowly, perhaps all at once, but it's a normal occurrence. The oddness of being put to sleep like that, you're counting down 100, 99, 98, and then I've never made it to 97. You're just out. And then you wake up again in a completely different place. It always reminds me of a small death.
And it's interesting how saying Hineni in a time of a small death or a possible permanent death is so so important in a sense, but also it's amazing that it's become instinctual for you in a sense. After the war and being a war photographer and being in such dangerous situations where, you might, I don't know, I'm probably stepping a bit beyond here, but whenever death comes, probably that will be a great instinct to say to the moment when that happens.
I mean, I read something somewhere, I can't remember, that people often cry out for their mothers in the moment of death. I don't know what will happen to me, but yeah, it is pretty instinctual to yell out, here I am, Hineni.
Yeah, I love this because some of us were not very terrified about death, but we're terrified about how it will happen, who is going to kill us. And in that sense, I imagine myself feeling or anticipating that it's something that I'm not expecting. The last thing I would think would be, oh shit, I didn't do, I shouldn't be here, or this person, like more rage, more surprise than total acceptance of whatever the circumstance.
Well, maybe it's because I've had so many near-death experiences that, again, for example, I was in a car accident this summer and, not my fault, just driving up a street and the guy runs a stop sign and slams into me. And in that moment when I did think I was dying, more the immediate thought was, well, there were a couple thoughts. One was, oh my God, my poor kids. Oh my God, my ex-husband's still on my will. And what a stupid way to die. It was less fear. I guess I'm not, that's a crazy thing to say. I'm not afraid of dying, but I've been to the brink so many times that I know it's just going to be one thing or another. It's going to be cancer. It's going to be a radiator dropping on my head. None of us know how we're going to die. I just hope it's not in a stupid way. I hope it's not like, a car accident or, a brick falling on my head or something like that. I hope I get to live a nice long life. I'd like to live to at least 90 if possible, throwing it out there to the universe and, die in my sleep. That would be awesome.
I hope so too. Although we come here also because of a stupid thing, one of our grandparents decided to go to this country instead of that country, and probably the night you were conceived, your parents were drunk, whatever, but yeah, I agree with you. So let me ask you something. How much of your life, when you are living your life, you are also, in a sense, thinking about the writing about your life? Because a lot of your life is in your books and articles, but how much when you are living it, you are thinking about the writing of it?
I mean, that's an interesting question because a lot of stuff has happened to me. I feel like I've gotten more than my fair share of traumas. And it's not that in the moment of the trauma, I'm thinking about, oh, well, how will I turn this into writing? It's after I've lived through it and I'm trying to work my way through the trauma that I realize the only way to work my way through it, and I've done this since I was a little kid, since the moment I could write, is to write it down. And that used to be a journal that I kept as a little kid. And now it's almost like my writing is my public journal in its own way. I mean, I'm not going to reveal everything, but I am living through moments that a few days later, I'll be like, oh, that's something I should maybe write about, or that's something I should maybe think about in context of something else. Or, a moment that I lived through in 2021, for example, has now started the basis of a new book. I can't talk about it yet, but it was just kind of it was like a random moment. It wasn't a trauma moment. It was just a random moment. And so I guess I am always paying attention to narrative as it's lived. It feels better for us humans to place our life in a narrative structure because otherwise it just feels like the chaos that it actually is. But yeah, no, oftentimes, and especially over the past 10 years, I've thought, well, I'd like to live less of a narrative. I don't want all these high climaxes anymore. I'd like to live sort of more of a normal line.
Is there a sense of hope whenever you are living in a difficult situation where you know that your writing will be able to help you afterwards to not only to heal from that situation, but at that moment, giving you hope that it won't everything go to pieces?
I'm not sure I'm hoping for my own sanity. Often what I'm doing when I'm writing is writing the story or book or essay I wish I had read before experiencing whatever it was I experienced. And a lot of the letters I get from readers are, oh my God, you've written my life, even though their life is completely different than mine. their circumstances are completely different. But if you write with a universality, right? If you write about your individual experience, thinking about it as a universal story, oftentimes people will project their own life onto the contents of your life and feel as if it's their story. It happens again. At first, I thought, what are they talking about? And then when I received letter after letter after letter with the same words, you wrote my life, I think, okay, well, that's what you're trying to do here. You're trying to make it easier for the next person who comes along and is experiencing the same thing you experienced.
What about your making sense of past experiences, not through writing, not through narrative, but through other wordless acts of healing, of incorporating in the body some sort of, making sense of it without words? Do you have any practice or healing modality that you return to?
Walking, always. I like to walk through problems, and I don't even listen to sorry, I know you're doing a podcast here, but when I need to work something through, I'll walk without headphones, and I'll just walk and think and think. Yoga. There's a wonderful practice that Jews do. Every year you mark the yahrzeit of a loved one with a candle. And so I've done that every year for my father. And it's coming on the 15th year now. He died young-ish at 67 of pancreatic cancer. And I find that ritual of just lighting the candle every year is incredibly healing. And moving in its own way too. You get to recall the person. I guess there are words involved there, so maybe I'm not exactly answering that question correctly, because I do say a few words about him. Photographing, I love taking pictures, trying to capture a feeling, maybe not necessarily an event anymore, but more of a feeling. What is the light doing? I love looking at light sparkling on the water, light hitting a tree, light hitting a leaf. That seems to be more my interest these days than wars. And cooking. I like to, spend some time when I'm done working the day, kind of trying out a new recipe, cooking. It's very mindless. It's soothing in some way. You get to create something that you get to eat afterwards. I could probably think of a million more, but you're catching me off guard with that question. So I don't know. If I think of more, I'll let you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been reading a lot about grief and grieving, and seeing how other cultures deal with those processes through chanting, through tending a fire, through just music probably, and how these experiences really get integrated in a sense that no words can do a great job, but there's something like very ancient, I think, in the way we have been evolving, where something ends up making sense without using language.
Totally.
Yeah. So in this podcast, we talk about health in general, but basically, you've been writing a lot, or you write a lot about the health arena and insurances and all the conflicts of interest that we have, and the pharma industry really, in a sense, creating for the past 100 years the sense of what health means and what we can do or we cannot do. How do you think the pharma industry has really shaped the collective consciousness of what health means, and what power do that takes us from us individuals and community?
Well, I want to speak more locally about America rather than globally, right? Because it's really in America that we have just completely shot ourselves in the foot in terms of health and wellness. First of all, the pharmaceutical industry is $1 billion industry. And so they're going to, and it's, for-profit industry for our health, which should not be for-profit, but they're going to try to earn as much money as possible. And the health and welfare of patients is secondary at best, particularly when it comes to insurance companies. And really what it feels like with insurance companies is their sole job is just to turn shit down, right? Perfect example, these ears, right? I lost my hearing to COVID. Nobody had ever heard of this. Oh, losing hearing to COVID. Although, doctors had been hearing about it. It started, right? Right when I lost my hearing, ENTs started seeing patients who had lost hearing to COVID. Normal, by the way, because throughout history, strep can lead to hearing loss. Lots of infections can lead to hearing loss. And thank God for hearing aids, which our insurance doesn't cover, by the way. But when I needed a small operation to open my eustachian tubes, which should have been really easy to do and absolutely should have been paid for by the health insurance industry, they turned it down in the 3 minutes before the operation was set to begin. This was last year, maybe even 2 years ago at this point. And it was so humiliating being there in a robe and then having been told my doctor was sorry, we can't do it. I mean, it's a $40,000 operation once you go under. I mean, it's just expensive, and that's crazy too. I mean, we should not have a $40,000 operation. Since then, I actually wrote an op-ed for the Daily Beast, and my ENT said that since that moment, and maybe because of that op-ed, that procedure is now being covered, not 100%, but I was able to get the operation a year and a half later. But it shouldn't have to take an op-ed for us to accept that somebody's eustachian tubes being shut with inflammation from COVID need to be opened, or that if I can't hear and I need to be a functioning adult who I'm 57, I'm not going to learn sign language now. I mean, I might have to one day, but I need to be able to hear. And we also know, there are studies that show that hearing loss leads to dementia, right? Isolation, hearing loss, 50% greater chance of getting dementia. So the costs of dementia are going to be so much more than my goddamn hearing aids. And yet I'm paying out of pocket. And luckily there's Costco hearing aids, which are, $2,400 instead of 10 grand. But these are insane economies we're doing. The beginning of Lady Parts, as you know, I ended up taking Uber Pool to the emergency room. Uber Pool doesn't exist anymore, but back then Uber Pool was like you'd share a ride with somebody. And the reason I did that is I was afraid of the cost of an ambulance. And I was right to be afraid. I recently had an ambulance ride because of my car accident. It's $4,000. Like who has an extra $4,000 sitting around? Thank God car insurance actually pays for ambulances because they know, like, you get in a car accident, you need an ambulance. But if you don't get in a car accident and you need an ambulance, well, tough luck, because the medical insurance company is not going to pay for that ambulance, which again, it's all nuts, right? I lived in Paris for 4 years, never once paid a doctor bill, barely paid anything for my birth control pills. And in terms of just even pharmaceutical industry insanity, let's take estrogen and Viagra, right? Okay, both are needed by older women and older men for sexual health and wellness. My partner's Viagra prescription is 79 cents for a whole month's worth. My cost for estrogen every month is $144 for the gel that I put on my leg, $20 for vaginal estrogen. These are necessary hormones to keep my bones safe, my brain safe, my heart safe. It's not like we can't have these things. And there was just an article yesterday that came out in the journal Menopause saying how wrong the data analysis from the Women's Health Initiative had been, and how woefully incorrect that analysis had been, and how it had deprived an entire generation of women, my mother's generation, from estrogen treatments, menopause hormone treatment, which leads to osteoporosis. It leads to urinary tract infections. It leads to all manner of health issues for women. And it's out of reach for a lot of people because of the cost. And this is with insurance, by the way. I have health insurance. That is the out-of-pocket cost, $144 for the gel per month, $20 for the cream, just crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. My father, he's a pediatric dentist, and since I was 5 years old, I've been hearing from him like cavities and all the things that we should do to prevent them. It's easy to prevent them, but it's now the chronic disease that I think like 2 billion people in the world have cavities. And it's difficult not to turn into a cynic. And in a sense, cynicism is in a sense needed. Like you use it a lot in your articles because that's a way also of just showing what is happening.
Yeah.
But how can we not become cynics? Because when we become cynics as victims of a system, then the system is wrong, definitely. But then we also, we lose something. And in terms of health, it also affects our health. I'm not saying.
The stress of dealing with the health insurance industry is killing us, right? Yeah. It's causing us to have illness. Just the stress back before Obamacare, when I, was struggling single parent, solo parent. I was taking care of kids on my own. My health insurance was $2,400 a month. I mean, who can afford that on top of rent and everything else? Certainly not me. And it was an intense pressure every month to pay that money, simply so I could be healthy. How do you not become a cynic? I don't think there's a way at this point with the current health insurance and health industry we have. I think our health care in this country is broken, has been broken, is getting worse, is getting more expensive. I certainly know of people who have moved abroad and taken advantage of, let's say they had a parent who was European, or there was a right of return if you were Lithuanian. I know people who have taken advantage of those opportunities to leave America behind because of health and because of health insurance, particularly once they're getting older and needing healthcare. We shouldn't have refugees from our health insurance industry.
Yeah, that's exactly what they are called, health refugees. How can we, in a sense, or in the United States at least, I don't like the word prevention, and it's clear that the pharmaceutical industry and all the whole health complex doesn't gain anything from prevention. Like, if we prevent whatever, the system runs on people being sick.
Yeah.
I believe activism and the kind of work you do is so important, but also, what are other modalities that in your community, your family, your society, your close people have taken some action to work towards prevention and wellness without needing that system? In a sense, there's also part of the health that it's in our hands. And I understand that the health complex industry prefer us to think that way, and they can wash their hands by saying, it's your fault, you're not eating properly, you are not exercising, and this is your fault. But in a sense, there's also that individual community part of prevention and living healthy lives without not blaming, but waiting for someone else to take care of us.
Right.
How can we empower people who want to have this mindset, and we don't really know where to start?
I mean, it's a family by family, step by step process, right? So in my family, as the head of my household, I serve as much organic food as I can, as much organic milk products as I can, particularly organic berries. I don't want my kids ingesting pesticides. I have filtered water. I have insisted since they were little that we go on walks and bike rides. I make sure that they exercise. My son's a big runner. My daughter, she's at med school, so she hardly has time to exercise, but she goes to a gym when she can. And my little one bikes to school every day. Except for when it's raining, then he's really in trouble because we don't live near a subway. I mean, we each have to do our own individual acts. I write my book so that I can put my megaphone out there a little louder. Sometimes it feels like screaming into the void, but then when people like you reach out, I'm like, oh, somebody read my work. That's great. And I also know, for example, having started the Substack Lady Parts. So after I finished the book Lady Parts, I realized there was just a lot more work that needed to be done. And what's really funny is a lot of the times people on my Substack, my readers, there's about 10,000 of us right now. A lot of my readers say, I don't know where to go. There's no menopause specialist. And so I just kind of say, well, if you're in New York, which a lot of them are, go to my doctor. My doctor actually recently said to me, so many people have come to my practice just from your Substack. So it's these small things, right? Helping people find the correct doctor is important. Warning people off of doctors that are bad is important. Getting out there and exercising is important. Feeding our family good food is important. Making sure where we can, if we can afford it, to get organic food, which, everybody else in the world just calls food. Like in France, the idea of organic is like, it's just food.
Yeah, in France and in Europe, they call it food.
Yeah,
that's it.
Food.
Yeah. Yeah, I live in Mexico, and the influence of the U.S. Way of producing food and distributing food and eating food and marketing food is similar or even the same. And actually, there's a lot of research that after the free trade agreement between Canada, the US, and Mexico, the whole demographic of Mexico changed because of following practices that had the economic label to it to promote economic growth and cooperation and everything. But the lifestyle of Mexicans changed so badly that diabetes became the number one thing in Mexico. And now we are number one in obesity and all those things. And, the system keeps blaming the victim, like you are very lazy and all those things. I don't think it's collateral damage from the NAFTA agreement. I know in a sense they knew about these potential problems. What they didn't do is do the numbers and the math to understand that the problems of chronic disease would cost the economy much more than what it would generate. And I think that's what's happening now, that in a sense it's good news, because now we can't afford the way we live. It's not about ethics. It's just there's not enough money, and that might help us to change. I don't know.
Except for the fact that what it just does is it forces health insurance companies just to deny care. I mean, I've had to argue with my health insurance company countless times this year just to get basic shit covered. So I don't know what the solution is.
Let's move on to another topic. You wrote an article like 6 months ago that's called "Deconstructing Harvard's Red Book," which a few days after you published it, you called it back, somewhat like pharma calls back a drug.
Yeah. I recalled it.
Recall, yeah, exactly. So can you tell me a little bit about this article? Because I really resonated with it. I actually saved it on my email, so when you deleted it, I still had it on my Gmail. But I love the way you really exposed this, and the metaphor really stayed with me, which is you said, no one really mentioned the importance of love. And if they did it as a side dish and not the main course, which is very powerful. Can you tell me about that, the story about that article?
Sure. So the Harvard Red Book I actually wrote a novel called The Red Book about this because I'm fascinated by it. The Red Book is, I have one right here. I can show you here. So what it looks like is this. It says Harvard Radcliffe Class of 1988. 30th anniversary report. So that's the one that I was referring to. And in it is just, people's life story. They can, you write in whatever you want, like what happened over the past 5 years. Fascinating read. More fascinating for what is left out than what is put in, often I find. And you have to kind of read between the lines to figure out what the hell you're reading. A lot of times people are brutally honest, and it's great. I love the honest ones that sort of talk about the struggles they've had, because who reaches age 56, I guess, when we had, or 57, without struggles? Nobody. But to not admit that, to me, felt, especially at this age, come on, yes, you went to Harvard, but you just were thrust out into the world like any other old schmo. So be honest, be truthful about your life. And, some of the entries, which I took to task, were just like, my daughter's at Harvard, my son's at Brown. It's just about accolades. It's about, did you grab that silver ring or that brass ring? Did your children grab that brass ring? So I called to task those who were less honest. And I thought, maybe try to next time, the next 5 years roll along, put a little more thought in it, dig a little deeper. And what happened was I wrote that, and then I went away with my new partner and his son for the weekend. It was really the first time I was getting to know his older son. And my phone just kept dinging to the point where I had to turn off notifications, with notifications from my class Facebook group, where I was so shocked at the vitriol, unbelievably shocked at the vitriol of those Facebook comments. And it was taking me out of the present moment with my partner and his son. And it hurt and it was painful. And so it's kind of a rash decision to just get rid of the article. But I just thought, again, because I've reached an age where I don't want conflict. I don't want to galvanize conflict. I don't want to live in conflict. So I just thought, well, it went out to people's email. I'll just erase it from the website, because they were just they were going nuts. And I also unsubscribed to the Facebook group. So I'm no longer a member of my college Facebook group. But there were comments on there by people that I had known and loved that were so cruel, it made me never want to go back to another reunion. Since then, some of those classmates have written to me privately to apologize. So that felt good. I didn't take any individual to task. I did not speak about anybody's specific Red Book entry. I was talking about the importance of taking off the mask at our age and being real with each other, and to stop identifying ourselves by the accolades, by the titles, and to start identifying ourselves by who we are and what we've experienced. And that hit a nerve, and that wasn't my intention. It's really interesting. It was not my intention to cause conflict or to hit that kind of nerve. But once the conflict was out there, and once one person says something and then somebody else joins in, and it becomes just this, like, it becomes bullying, and it becomes a bunch of people ganging up on one person. And the internet has made a really excellent environment for that. I just didn't want to be a part of that. So I just took it off the website.
I applaud and I applaud your bravery. And what I think it allows you to say all those things is because if someone is really has a history of putting herself in the table and showing what you've got and your vulnerabilities and your failures and your, you have the permission to do so, because you're not passing judgment. You're just showing what you're thinking, but it's all in a sense based on you are doing it, because sometimes we just criticize others, but we're not prepared to put ourselves in out there.
Yeah.
And that's something that, in that sense, I applaud you, because you first talk about yourself and your things, and then you give opinions, which again are not directed to a specific person. And in that paper, you said there's this elite's aversion for self-reflection, and I think that really that's probably one of the most the thing that hinders our wellness in general. That as elites, we have to maintain a specific image, and then we cannot look ourselves into the mirror. And because we have built our global communication community images of what is appropriate and what is cool to be in this society, we don't have to, because we have built those goals based in the image that we already have. But all that self-reflection really is impossible, and it hinders our, I don't know if call it progress or healing, but just seeing that it's not so reductionistic.
I also think it hinders our connection with others. And I think that's what I was really trying to get at, is that this book, what is this? This is like, we're connecting with our old classmates. Like, it's supposed to be, the other thing people got really mad is that, well, it's not a published book that anyone could read. I'm like, yeah, but there are 1,600 of these per class. Anyone can pick it up from somebody else's house and read, I don't know.
Yeah. And even more, like, it's a private publication. Like, not the whole world will know about your struggles and your doubt and your confusion. It will be your peers.
Yeah. Anyway, maybe I'll republish it at some point, but not now.
Yeah. Let me ask you about a quote you put in your book, which is, "When a writer is born into a family, the family is finished," by Kreslow Milosz.
Yeah.
And then you say, I would argue the opposite. I would say, when a family is finished, a writer is born. I tend to agree with both of you.
I agree with both too. So I was just trying to play on that old trope, right? But I do think that a writer is born when they're trying to make sense of what feels like lies around them, whether it's the immediate family or the extended family or the religion that they're in or the community that they're in. The writer, especially the young writer, is just confused and trying to make sense of the situation they have been born into. And if that situation is broken in some way, or off, or toxic, or damaging. It's a way of surviving that brokenness.
And again, you say when a family is finished, a writer is born. Then also it gives us hope and a path.
Right. I look at every bad thing that has ever happened to me as an opportunity. Everything that happens to you is in the moment, especially if it's a trauma, it's horrific. I mean, let's go back to my car accident I just had. I mean, it was really scary and bad. And there was so much blood and stitches and hospital and ambulance. But in retrospect, what I learned about airbags was very useful. And now I'm working with this woman who's writing a letter to Pete Buttigieg about, hey, can we please test with female crash test dummies? Like, I always look at these bad things as an opportunity to learn something new. So what I learned from my car accident, where I was injured, not really by the car crash, which wasn't fast, but by the airbag hitting my face, because I'm 5'2", the steering wheel is too close to me. And so when I slammed on the brake, the airbag hit me in the face. So I had 21 stitches, well, first 9 stitches, then another 21 stitches here. Like this part of my lip was falling off essentially. And it was like a big hole in there. My hand was crushed in 3 different places, broken in 3 different places. I had a big laceration across my stomach where the seatbelt had hit, because seatbelts are not supposed to rise up above your hips. They're supposed to hold your hips. That was a good place for them to be. But females, guess what? We're shaped like hourglasses, or some of us are. So when you get in a car accident, that seatbelt rides up to the smallest part of your waist and hurts your internal organs. Why don't we know this? Because we don't test cars with female crash test dummies. We test them on 5'10" normal size, normal weight males. So at some point they were criticized for this, and they decided to get a female crash test dummy. And the irony of that female crash test dummy is it's a 5 foot, like, I think it's either 5'1" or 5'2" male, 108 pounds. Like, who's 108 pounds? Like, I'm not. And it doesn't have the internal organs or the build of a woman. So, and also they didn't test it in the front seat, the driver's seat. They tested it in the passenger seat and the back seat. Anyway, I'm now trying to help this woman, Maria Kuhn, fix this. Again, we're writing a letter to Pete Buttigieg. We're screaming into the void again. This has to be fixed.
Yeah. And they will at some point, I hope. I'm smiling when you are describing your face injuries, because I just remember that in your bio, in your website, you put your photo bleeding and everything. And I love that humor that you have all the time. Tell me something. I feel like I'm able to be more honest when writing than when talking to someone. Do you too? Or even, do you feel funnier when you are writing than in conversation in general?
Oh, funnier. Oh, it really depends if I'm on or not. Like, sometimes I just can hit them, or I'm with people that find me funny. And other times you're with people that don't find you funny at all. But yeah, it's much easier to be funny in writing. I mean, which is why stand-up comedy is so hard. But after I got separated from my husband back in 2013, one of the things I decided to do was to take improv classes, not to get funnier, but to sort of be in the moment and try to find the humor of every moment, to yes and everything. And that was incredibly useful, because you're so vulnerable up on stage. You have no script, right? You're just thrown up there in front of an audience, and you have to create the script as you go, and you have to create humor as you go. And I found that to be one of the most interesting trainings I've ever experienced. I kind of feel like everybody should have to do improv.
Yeah, it's interesting that the yes and methodology comes from comedy. Yeah. Like it should be like just basic standard education in general.
I mean, and also you can really spot a narcissist when they don't yes and you. Like, I'm not going to name names, but I was in a improv class with one of the Real Housewives of New York. And I had never seen the show, but everybody else knew who she was. I had no idea who she was. But I would be doing a scene with her in class, and I'd be like, hey, look at my pet squirrel. And she would say, that's not a pet squirrel. I mean, she didn't know how to yes and. She didn't know how to say yes, and the squirrel likes to eat nuts, or whatever the heck she was going to say. She just couldn't build on it. She was just she would crash it down. And you just think, well, what are we doing up here? We're supposed to be cooperating. You're supposed to be helping me out here.
It's funny that you say that it's a way of finding narcissists, uh, which is one also of the ways we can diagnose an unhealthy society in a sense. So very individualistic and not only not being able to cooperate, but in a sense not being able to relate in general.
Yeah. And
Okay.
it's just getting worse with all of us sort of trapped in our own little, social media worlds. It's just so bad now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Deborah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation. We went through a lot of spaces. I really appreciate your work, and thank you for taking the time to talk to me. And I hope we can still, at least be friends and say yes and to whatever happens.
Yes, and nice to meet you too.
Have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.